What is up, Bitcoiners? Good morning. How are you? Welcome to another episode of the Build a Mind podcast. I'm your host, Trevor. Today, I'm here with Craig Cherlet. Today is it's interesting. Me and Craig, we could talk for hours, and we have talked for hours. You know, when we had him do a preliminary conversation for the podcast, and just now we were talking forever, and we're like, oh, we gotta get into this rip. But I'm excited for you guys to hear this conversation. It's going to be really more of a philosophical dive into Bitcoin and Bitcoin mining. You know, sometimes we like to have these conversations. The new Bitcoiners, the new miners coming into the space. Really, you guys need to have an understanding and a good basis for where the ecosystem is going, and that's just it. Bitcoin and mining is an ecosystem. So Craig is the perfect person to have on to have this conversation. He's been in Bitcoin for quite a while. He knows what he's talking about. He has an interesting background. So, you know, Craig began tinkering with computers in the late 1980s, developing a passion for technology and education and programming. Studied computer science and electro engineering. He's worked in various sectors, including marketing, consulting, and finance, and he's gained significant experience in the banking industry. So we're going to talk to Craig about where he sees the market moving and kind of his experience and how that's played a role in his Bitcoin journey. Before we do that, I want to tell you guys about the Mastermind Club.
Welcome to the Mastermind Club, your ultimate gateway into the world of Bitcoin mining. Whether you're just starting out or looking to scale your operations, our vibrant community of like-minded enthusiasts is here to support you every step of the way. Join us for weekly sessions led by industry pros, where you'll exchange ideas, brainstorm strategies, and stay motivated on your mining journey. From heat management to site optimization, our monthly deep dives cover the technical know-how you need to succeed. And with access to our entire back catalog, you'll never miss a beat. But that's not all. Our members enjoy exclusive one-on-one sessions with veteran miners, plus direct access to special pre-sales and insider opportunities at Bitcoin Mining World. Ready to take your mining to the next level? Join the Mastermind Club today and secure your spot in the future of Bitcoin mining. Visit bitcoinminingworld.com or scan the QR code now. And now back to the show.
All right, Craig, welcome to the Build a Mind podcast.
Hey, Trevor, thanks for having me. Super excited for this conversation and great intro. That mastermind looks super awesome too. So yeah, thanks for having me today.
Yeah, the mastermind is a great opportunity for everyone in the space. It's absolutely free for anyone to join. We are constantly giving out all of this free content and resources for people who want to get into mining, because mining is hard. You know, mining is not an easy thing. So I think that's like a perfect first step for anybody who wants to take the dive down the mining rabbit hole. So yeah, it's great. It's actually how I got started doing all this. So it's fun stuff. But appreciate you being here today, man. I kind of gave a little bit of a brief introduction on you, but if you want to just kind of start off by telling the audience about your previous history in in your career, and then how you kind of got into the space.
Yeah, for sure, Trevor. That's awesome. Yeah, so I'm a Gen Xer, so I've been tinkering in tech since we were using cassette tapes to store data. So it's been an interesting ride watching the internet kind of come to life over the last 30 years. And, I just, been really working in all kinds of industries. So in my early days, I went into electronic engineering and computer science, and I was, learning all about tech really at the beginnings of the internet in the early 2000s when things were really starting to take off and the internet was becoming a bit more commercial. So I spent many years, being a marketing and technology consultant for all kinds of companies, helping them, with digital transformation, and really, building websites and, just taking advantage of all the cool things the internet had to offer, as it was, growing and building. I went through the .com era. I survived that, and learned so much in a variety of different companies. later on in my journey, I started to get into payments and into banking. And I was working as a consultant in a central bank, like a regional bank. And, we were building all kinds of neat things, payment systems. I remember working with Travelex. These were like traveler checks that they were digitizing at the time. So, again, before internet, people that traveled used to go and get paper travelers checks, in order to use those abroad in different countries. And so it was interesting working on those types of projects. And then, the online banking revolution began, and every bank, started to build these, websites and mobile apps. And so I spent a lot of time in that world, helping financial institutions do that kind of work, like build those, web apps, all as we were getting into, web 2.0, all that era was happening. And so spent a lot of time working in that, and then worked at various other contracts, not just in banking, but also in insurance and government, anti-money laundering and lotteries and casinos, a whole gamut of very highly regulated industries. I was probably first introduced to Bitcoin, I think it was 2012 or 2013. But again, I really didn't pay attention. I was a technologist. And so I was, looking at different technologies that supported my clients, which were, banking and insurance, like the current financial system that we have out there. And so I looked at it. I was more like, hey, look, it's another option. You can pay online, digital, and hey, you can pay with this new cryptocurrency thing, And so, I didn't go down the rabbit hole. I was just kind of, again, new tech. This is neat. And so, I continued on doing a lot of this consulting. And one of the contracts I was hired was to actually work on a central banking system. So actually like a banking system, this organization was looking at replacing this. And so I really got into that and looking at that. And in my travels, blockchain, I guess, was starting to come up. And so we looked at that. We looked at down that pathway, as solutions for this, central banking system, and quickly dismissed by leaders as, smoke and mirrors. And, again, the arrogance in a lot of these organizations is, very against new tech in a lot of ways, or very suspect of new tech. And so they dismissed it, but my interest was piqued. And so, I was starting to look more at Bitcoin. But, again, like a lot of, Bitcoiners, I also started to look at Ethereum and some of the other, tokens, and purely, because I was curious about the tech, right? I was coming at this from a technologist and looking at these open source projects, Lightning Network was coming about as well. And so I was reading a lot of white papers, not just Bitcoin, but all of them, just kind of, what are these different people building? What are the thesis? So I didn't have a strong opinion, about any of them. And, I even minted my own, tokens, to just see how it worked. Right. And I've never sold them. I've never done anything with them. They're sitting there, but it was more of like a learning experience. Like, how do these blockchain things work? And so, I did end up, as I experimented, I bought different tokens, in the early days. Like, I'm talking less than, 50 tokens out there at the time, right? When it was kind of still small, not the place we are now where we've got 20,000 tokens and you can, everything's a token and everybody's got a coin. It wasn't like that. And so that was just kind of proliferating and growing. So it really was just like an Ethereum kind of Bitcoin world. And so, I played in all that. Eventually I got burned in one of the, the crashes, one of the, shitcoin winters, they call it. And that's what kind of, in that process, I was on Twitter, and interacting with different people and always getting kind of salty responses from, Bitcoin maxis, about this. And I didn't get it, right? Again, I came at this from a technology perspective. I'm like, there's room for everybody, we're all just building software here, right? Not really fully understanding, the Bitcoin white paper and its economic and social impacts and what Bitcoin was really trying to disrupt. And so, from that point, I started siding with the maxis. I started really reading into Bitcoin. I started less time on the shit coins and more time going down the Bitcoin rabbit hole, which then, as I started to read more of the philosophical stuff, like the Bitcoin Standard, and some of these other books, I started to read understand the why behind Bitcoin. Why did Satoshi create this? Don't like centralized banks. I get that. And then as I started to read these books, I started to actually, I don't know, kind of get a pit in my stomach, because I was working in financial institutions. I was in the corporate cultures. I was in the C-suites meeting, the people that were making decisions. And when I was reading these things about Bitcoin, I was actually living those experiences and seeing how, these organizations are run, and seeing how, like, really the decision making is so concentrated, and how, how they run these banks and how they make decisions. Like, it's just it was very challenging for me to kind of really see these things happening in real life and reading about it. So for me, it was like really starting to solidify, the why of Bitcoin, and I also understood in the banks, like, how complex the systems were. So, we've reached a point, and I think we're still in this point in a lot of financial institutions, where, they built the technology for the first time, like payments and wires and all these things. They built those 30 years ago, and a lot of that infrastructure is still being used today. These rails, these wire systems that banks have made, they've just invested and bolted onto these software applications, creating, if you're a developer, like, creating a lot of technical debt, a lot of mess, a lot of mixing of technologies. And it just, again, I started to go back to the Bitcoin and going, like, the why for this is just so real, right? And most people don't see the inner workings of these financial institutions. Most banks are portrayed as trust, and we're sophisticated and we're advanced and we know what we're doing, trust us, we know all that. And then when you're behind the curtain, you're like, holy cow, like, how do they actually say that with a straight face, in public? And so that was a big shift for me. And that's when I, really started to really focus on Bitcoin, dedicate more and more time to it. I started, spending a lot more time on online and in kind of like Bitcoin circles on Twitter, started my own newsletter, and then started kind of getting into mining. All those kinds of things started to cascade, because I just went down the rabbit hole. I'm both software developer, but also a tinkerer, but also a business minded person. So I just started looking at all those angles, and then that's where it's taken me to now, where I'm working in the industry part-time, and, building a little business that's helping miners. And, that's kind of where we're at right now.
Yeah. It is an interesting history, and it's great that you were able to go through that journey and see, like, oh man, this is not what I want to do. The things that are happening behind the curtain, so to speak, is just, it's wrong. It's completely not okay. And you, like, kind of did a 180 and pivoted the other direction into Bitcoin and this space. I am curious, what year did that pivot happen? Like, when did you leave the banking system, like the banking world, and go into Bitcoin?
It was probably around 2020 when I was okay. Like, I actually left the contract I was working on, building a central bank. I was like, I'm out. This is it. I fundamentally was just, not into it anymore. Right. It was kind of like rebuilding the past instead of building the future, and it's like, I don't know. I just was struggling, philosophically with supporting something that I had just, like, realized was the problem, you know, and seeing the problem, like, you go back 40 years, no, not even, like, you go back 25, 30 years, and there was no tech in a lot of these financial institutions. So all the decisions were made, you keep paper ledgers, and, it sounds ridiculous just even 20 years ago, but there are companies that kept paper ledgers because, again, the control could be maintained in a very tight knit group. And you don't systemize things like we have today, where you could prevent people from doing things that, aren't ethical or aren't legit, or, or maybe in the gray area. Right. So all these controls just proved again how much, ability central planners and central bankers and people in those centralized kind of organizations have control over such a huge amount of impact, to people outside the organization.
it's very ego driven, you know. Everybody, well, not everybody, because you made it out. But it to me, from the outside looking in, like, it would seem that, you know, the people who have control of those systems, like, they want to maintain control because their egos tell them, like, oh, I'm this great amazing person that with all of this control, and I move markets, kind of thing, you know, like the Jamie Dimons of the world. You think of
Yeah.
them, you know. And I go back to what I previously said. You know, it's great that there are still people, and you see this in the military all the time, especially with like all the Bitcoin veterans that are helping out with the North Carolina disaster and stuff. But you see it, you know, like, you're part of this organization and you don't align with it. And because you don't align with it, because your philosophies and like your ideology doesn't point you down that road of like controlling other people and making these systems that control people, you're like, I'm out. I'm jumping ship. I don't care what I've been a part of. I don't care what you guys are building over here. Let's go build something new, something amazing, something that's going to actually help the people and bring people out of this state of controlled poverty. With that being said, let's kind of dive a little bit into this project that you've been working on. You know, you talk about, you know, you're a technologist, you're a tinkerer. I myself am a tinkerer. I love to mess around and play with things and learn how things work. But let's kind of dive into BitHelm, which is the company that you founded. When did that company kind of come to fruition, and what is BitHelm?
Yeah, sure. So it was about 20, I think it's 2021. 21 or 20, yeah, 21, I think, is when a partner of mine and we decided, I was actually moving back into the prairies, into central Canada, and hydroelectric is huge out here. And so, you know, we wanted to kind of capitalize on that and really, you know, help people. Like the cost of electricity is very low here in this province compared to other parts of Canada. And so we saw it as an opportunity for a lot of, you know, mining to go on here. And so there's already mining going on in our province. You know, there's 25, 30 larger scale mining operations. They all run kind of under the radar, but, you know, they're here. And, you know, the company BitHelm is more about, you know, helping smaller companies and individuals, you know, get started mining. So, you know, from the person that wants to put an S9 under their cottage up in the north, you know, to keep heat going and, you know, pay for the heat, to, you know, other people just kind of, you know, doing the same kind of heat thing in the city, in their garage or in their, you know, crawl space. So helping those little guys kind of get set up, you know, purchasing equipment, you know, installing, giving them a hand, like the hobbyists, you know, to help them figure it out. And then, you know, as we grow, our longer term vision is to work, you know, with more and more companies, people that have, you know, excess space in their industrial properties and excess capacity for electricity. So we're looking at people that want to do, you know, in the 10 to 20 miner kind of range, in a you know, either data centers sitting outside their buildings on their property or space inside. And so, you know, we found a few organizations that, or a few entrepreneurs that are, you know, looking for like heat, but then also, you know, they have the space, you know, so we're looking at that. That's one of the areas. And then we're also doing a lot of education. So we have a website where we educate and help people kind of, you know, set up mines, talk about, you know, security, how to, you know, use Bitcoin, get Bitcoin, you know, how to set up your networks and stuff like that, you know, security for the, you know, the pleb, you know, at home. We kind of create some marketing materials around that. And then we do research. A lot of it is kind of diving into things like, you know, Lightning, open source projects like the Galoy banking platform. We're looking at that, things that support circular economies, you know, those kind of technologies. And so another part of it, of the organization is helping businesses come online. So people that want to accept Bitcoin point of sale systems. We've implemented BTC Pay server for some people as well, you know, so they can have an e-commerce Bitcoin experience, but then also a point of sale experience. So we're trying to provide those services as well. So that's kind of the, you know, we're still a small company, and you know, we grow as we, you know, meet new customers, pretty grassroots, pretty, you know, we're not funded or anything like that. We're a Bitcoin first Bitcoin only company, and just trying to, help Bitcoin, hyper Bitcoinization. So,
well, I just gotta say, I love the overall like vision for the company, what you guys are trying to do. As a new Bitcoin miner myself, I know firsthand that the idea of being a Bitcoin miner can be really grandiose at first, but then once you start diving down that particular fork of the rabbit hole, you're like, oh, wait a minute, this is a lot harder than I realized. But it's actually not like it's that hard. It's just that there's so many different components that revolve around like the idea of mining Bitcoin. People don't think about security, and I'm not just talking like physical security of your Bitcoin miners. I'm talking like network security. Like people don't think about this. And so what you guys are doing is incredible. I love the initiative. I love the idea. Bitcoin mining world, we want to raise up the next generation of Bitcoin miners. And that's part of what this podcast is like, through my journey of learning how Bitcoin mining works, I'm trying to like distill that information out to our audience. And so I think it just kind of aligns, like we're all on the same page here. We're all trying to get that information out. Education and research and helping people just understand like what this is. I think that's so important. My whole thing is like, I quickly realized that I don't want to be an industrial miner. I don't want to be like this 300, 600, 6,000 miner operation. Like I'm okay with my 3 miners just kind of running in my basement or, in my shed in the backyard and just kind of using the heat in some way, shape, or form.
Yeah, I agree. I'm the same. I think the large industrial mines are getting harder and harder to create, right? And it's also centralization in a lot of ways, right? So to me, I like what they've done. These big miners are great. They're very, they're investment vehicles. People are, basically going and converting fiat into these mining organizations. So I'm like you. I like the smaller scale. I like the decentralization. I would also like to focus on like renewable energy and like how it builds out into the energy ecosystem, right? I think that's like a huge part of this. Our local government here is just, we got a new government in the last year, and they're really focused on increasing our wind capacity here. Right. And so they want more windmills, even more solar. We've got lots of hydro. We want to do more hydroelectric as well. But, funding all these, our Crown Corporation is like is billions in debt, and their debt servicing is just growing, just like the United States, just like all these governments, everybody's like, gone into debt, to build infrastructure. And so this would be a great kind of, pitch, is really pushing that, buyer of last resort and building smaller mines, like putting 20 mines, miners at the bottom of a windmill versus, trying to secure, 20 megawatts from the Crown Corporation in some, mega mine kind of thing. And that's stopped until 2028 right now. You can't open an industrial mine in Manitoba. They put a moratorium on the existing ones while they do a study and look at that, because the number of applications that they've got here to purchase that electricity, is outstripping the supply, right? So to me, I look at this as an opportunity, and where kind of we try to fit in is like, there's already infrastructure built out. There's abandoned warehouses around. They don't have necessarily, 5 megawatts, but some of them might have, a half a megawatt, that you can leverage there. So to me, I think that's also, when you're under the megawatt, you don't have to go through feasibility studies with the hydro corporation. So you don't have to spend $100,000, to write a paper, and study, the impacts of you putting an industrial mine in an area, which will likely, cost you another $100,000 just to get the approvals and get everything in place before you've even put a shovel in the ground or bought one ASIC miner, right? So there's a lot of challenges in those jurisdictions. And it also, it's an education. The governments don't know, right? They look at, it's a cryptocurrency mine to them, not a Bitcoin mine to them. So again, we're still in those kind of political circles where people are just general population people, they don't understand the net value, and a lot of them have the anecdotal media,
Yeah.
headlines in their head about it, right? And so
Ye-
that's a challenge. And again, we'll talk about this a bit more later, but this is why we kind of started a meetup as well, is to somewhat organize, Bitcoiners and potentially have a voice, an organized voice, as we grow. So.
Well, along the lines of like organizing and having a voice and then like being able to move swiftly. I don't know if you're familiar with Bob Burnett. He runs Barefoot Minds.
Yes,
So
yeah.
he's going to be coming on the podcast next week, but he
awesome.
tells this story of the elephants, the horses, and the rabbits, and he talks about how like these elephants, which are these large industrial mining, like think of like the riots and the marathons, they've got 700 megawatts in one facility.
Yeah.
And like, they're super co-opt. They're controlled by their shareholders. Like it's this really difficult to move situation. But
100%.
then you break it down, like the rabbits, the tiny guys, like you and me, like the small, like I've got 10 miners, I've got 100 miners, maybe. We can pick up and we can move. Like that sends more signal out, especially when you're trying to do things like heat reuse in a small community or a dorm room or something like that. But along those lines, it's like you at your meetup, you being this small guy, like small fish in a big pond, preaching or evangelizing. I shouldn't say preaching because it seems too seems weird of a word, but evangelizing this technology and this system that we call Bitcoin is like you are changing things. You're moving the needle, whether it's just in your small town of Manitoba. I mean, I guess it's not small, but like, it's small-ish. You're making a difference, and that difference matters. And when there's, when there's 150 of you just all over the North America or even the world, evangelizing and speaking about what it is that you're doing and providing education, helping people do their own research and verify, not trust, it really does change things. We talked a little bit off air, and I kind of had mentioned that, I am hopeful for the future, but I'm also like very nervous and scared. But what you guys are doing is what gives me hope for the future.
Yeah, this is the low time preference of Bitcoin, right? It's the patience of like seeing the long-term vision and just kind of accepting, like we've been so conditioned by Wall Street to think in 3-month intervals. If you're not successful in 3 months, you're a failure. And it's like, that's conditioned people to be like, oh, why isn't Bitcoin worth $1 million already? It's like, because these things take time. We're in price discovery land, and we're going to be here for another 50 years, maybe. I don't know, right? Like we don't move like the stock market. It's a whole different animal, right? And so what I'm excited too, I think, like, again, I look in my own backyard and I see lots of opportunity. I talked about wind, right? So I really think, again, it's the mega mines don't meet the use case of like building out the grid in the best way. Like I like the building out the grid use case, right? Like if the governments were like, we want Bitcoin, right? We understand it's an asset. We get that whole mining thing, and the government can now have this, and I'm talking provincial governments, not, the federal government. This is like the local, our state or province, if you want to call it in Canada. They're not printing money. Those governments are just trying to manage their citizens, manage their infrastructure. They have to go to the central banks to get money to borrow it. They have to beg from federal governments to get money. But I think this brings even these smaller governments more sovereignty, where they can directly generate, an asset, a liquid asset that they can convert into Canadian dollars if they want, but they can create an asset from their resources. So I look at our province and I go, okay, we've got water as a resource. So we've got existing hydro generation that we can use for demand management, right? We could literally set up smaller mines that, run at night and turn off during the day, so that there's always a constant demand in generating, right? Which is better on the equipment, better for the hydro dams. I look at wind, same kind of scenario. How do you start funding or how do you start paying for the loan to build the windmill as soon as it's built? You don't have to worry about the network connection and creating buyers and stuff. Buyers of last resort in wind. The other thing I look is biogas, right? Every town has a landfill, right? And they have, gas mitigation strategies, and it's proven. People are taking gas out of landfills. They're taking gas out of cow shit and they're turning it into electricity, right? Yeah. And how do you pay for that infrastructure? Well, you mine Bitcoin, and then you're creating an asset out of a liability. So I think the education part of really separating Bitcoin and crypto, and not thinking about this investment thesis. It's more about the infrastructure. It's about what Bitcoin can do to support communities, not about number go up, right? Because I think that's where crypto is all about number go up, and that spills into Bitcoin. And to me, it's like, it's financial infrastructure, it's energy infrastructure, it's the money protocol on top of the internet protocol. Those are the things that get clouded amongst all the Wall Street noise and all this Bitcoin as an investment only vehicle, right? And so that's going to take time, changing those perceptions. It's not about necessarily changing the leadership that's in there now. It's the leadership that's going to be there in 10 years will understand these things as they come into those roles, rather than trying to convince. So I think that's the time preference. You got to slow down and realize a lot of this stuff is generational change, right? The last Bitcoin's not going to be mined till like 2140 or something, right? So we're a long ways away from, the last Bitcoin actually, coming into existence. So I tell people to slow down. It's like, we've got lots of time. We're still very early. Yeah, it's the way I look at it.
We are definitely early, and we're on a trajectory to change the world. But like you said, that it's gonna take time, and people in general need to just slow down and stop worrying about what they have versus what they need. You know what I mean? And I think that's a really big problem. It's hard for people because, you come from the finance background, what it's like to be on that treadmill, constantly running faster and faster to stay in one place. I mean, you literally just told me that over the last couple of days, the Canadian dollar has devalued by, what was it, like 3%, 4%?
Quite a bit. Yeah.
Quite a bit, so I mean, it's this perpetual treadmill that everybody's on. And until you have this basis of understanding that you can save your value, it's hard to see outside of that box. So I do have hope. I want people to recognize their own strengths and the value that they can provide. And I am seeing it. I mean, even in my own backyard, we have this mine, not in my town, but a couple hours away from me in Cascade Locks. They've got a hydro dam on the river up there that my buddy Joe has been working with them to get this, working. But they're working with the local authorities to make this Bitcoin mining operation happen, because it's actually, they're providing cheaper power to all the residents, because this Bitcoin mining operation has come in. They're the buyer of last resort. They're buying up all of this stranded energy that, otherwise wouldn't have gone anywhere, which is reducing the entire population of Cascade Locks' energy bills, so that everybody there is now paying less to live. And the Bitcoin mining operation is doing amazing. My buddy Joe they're very profitable. They're doing really good. The local authorities and the local citizens really appreciate the mining operation being there. And it's because they've taken a lot of things into consideration, noise pollution, how the energy is going to be dispersed when it's needed for the residents versus when the Bitcoin operation needs it. So they've done a lot of things to make sure that every base was covered. And what I want to see is more of this, they're 5 megawatts, 10 megawatts. It's a tiny operation in the grand scheme of things. We need more of that, just all over.
I 100% agree with that, right? That's, again, that reminds me of what Gridless is doing in Africa.
Yes.
That, to me, that use case, it's such a simple form of a community literally on their own, self-sufficient. They're creating value from the energy that's around them. They're building out their own grid. They're mining at night, and then they're watching the usage. So when the usage is low from people having lights and cooking, then they're mining, right? And it's like, and they're the revenue and the profit they're getting from mining is getting reinvested in more wire, more telephone poles, more infrastructure to get that energy, right? And so I agree. I think that's a huge turning point where we need to get to, where governments now look at it and go, oh, like this can help us. Like this can literally help build things out. Like, hydro's another one. I look at what Upstream Data, an Alberta company here, that works in oil and gas, and they've been building out their their hash huts, right? Which they're stopping flared gas. They're taking flared gas that was going into the atmosphere. The amount of methane, like there's so many flared gas wells around the world, and Bitcoin mining, you can easily turn that into an asset. And that's what they're doing, right? It's happening. They're capping off the flare. They're turning it in. They're taking that natural gas, putting it in a generator, mining Bitcoin. And now they're turning something that was a liability into an asset, and creating jobs along the way. It's like, economic boom. This Upstream Data is building these hash huts. There's builders working. Like, it's just a net positive, right? But it's still not getting through the cloud of like, ooh, Bitcoin uses as much energy as a small country. Like that very basic, simple narrative that's been ingrained in the average person, which is just ridiculous. Well, like it's meaningless.
It just goes to show like the education that the average person has like is so small, like so low, so basic. Because to say like, oh, Bitcoin uses more than a small country, well, of course it does. You look at a small country, people heating their homes, which accounts for 25% of the electrical infrastructure in the United States. People heating their homes use more electricity than small countries, because small countries don't have the electrical infrastructure to, you know what I mean? Like,
it's all sensationalism, right?
Exactly.
And this is why it's so important to be like Bitcoin, not crypto, because crypto is all about like TradeFi, right? It's about like, great, there's cool projects, whatever, but they're not in competition with Bitcoin. But the normies think that's what it is. They just think about number go up. And again, I've made it my mission. A lot of the things I do on my website, in my newsletter, is talking about this stuff, right? Talking about the smaller projects. There's a guy in Idaho that's, he's heating his car wash, his truck wash.
Kate Peterson, we've had him on the show.
Like, that stuff that's what's important to me. That's the stories we need to be telling, because people look at that and go, oh, you're turning a liability into an asset, right? And to me, it's those stories we need to keep talking about, and keep out there. And the mega minds, obviously get a lot of airplay, I guess, in the media, because again, they're part of the current. You do publish a press release, and then it gets picked up in Google, and people are talking. But the motivation behind that is invest in our company, fund us, invest in our stock. Not about like, hey, look what I'm using Bitcoin mining for. I'm using the heat, all these things. Even out here in Manitoba, there's people that are using it to heat up like chicken coops in the winter. Right. So it's like they're already spending money on natural gas to heat the chicken coop, or they're spending it on electricity. Why not just put this miner thing in between that process, and you'll get your hot air, but you'll get something to pay for the hot air too.
Exactly. Which, I mean, at the very least, now all of a sudden you're taking what was a net loss and turning it into a break even, which if you're let's say you're selling chicken eggs or chickens, all of a sudden now you have more gross profits at the end of the day. And I think that is a huge use case. Like, yeah, it's great that like the plebs are mining at home using the heat for their houses and stuff like that. But that's small. I think about the hundreds of thousands of businesses in North America, especially northern parts of North America, that need heat for their businesses to operate. And whether it's like during the process of creating like the product, or just to maintain, comfortable conditions for the employees.
Yeah.
All of that eats into the revenue at the end of the day. And if you can increase your revenue because you're decreasing your costs, I mean, that's a huge thing for a lot of businesses. And we talk about like the idea of people trying to live sustainable lives. I mean, that right there is a path towards sustainability. And I just
100%. Yeah, exactly. You know, I also like, I was, again, since being back in the prairies here, you know, I read an article last year about how our government is trying to support farmers, grain farmers. And they're basically like doing all these grants and like, you know, low cost interest loans to dry grain. Right. And I'm like, okay, what are these grain dry? So I look at the grain drying machines and they're just these giant heaters.
yeah.
You know, big fans, giant heaters, keeping piles of grains dry. And I'm like, again, another use case, right? They have to use energy to do that, right? So there's an input cost to them drying their grain. Otherwise, the grain goes bad and it loses its value. So again, to me, that's a use case. That's a use case that someone could build a combo Bitcoin mine grain, you know, drying kind of solution, right? So like I don't know, maybe it's out there, but like to me, it's like A plus B equals C, you know, with a bit of D revenue coming out the back end, right? So, you know, even if it's just a wash in terms of cost, you know, and your Bitcoin revenue from creating that heat just pays for the heat, like you're already ahead of the current game, right?
Yeah.
So like to me, that again, this is what gives me hope is these use cases. We're still building like Bitcoin heaters for swimming pools and hot tubs. Like that's the part we're at right now, right? Which is the tinkerers going small scale. But like you take a swimming pool heater and you 10x it, well, now you're heating something industrial, right? So I think the industrial applications are huge, but the getting people over that hump, getting people to that place of understanding that you and I have right now is the greatest challenge. It's education, right? And so that's why we do these kind of podcasts. That's why we do meetups. That's why we kind of keep the dialogue going, you know?
And that's a perfect segue into, you know, this conversation about meetups. I really want to ask you specifically about the Manitoba meetup that you have, you know, started and, you know, what kind of inspired you to create this. I think we kind of have an understanding of what inspired you. Maybe you could like just like chisel it out a little bit for us. But I really agree with you. I think that you know, education around the ecosystem of Bitcoin and mining and how it can not only just help people on an individual scale, but also industries and businesses and corporations can benefit from this as well. So kind of just explain how the Manitoba meetup was created, what inspired you to do it, and then we'll just kind of let the conversation go from there.
Yeah, 100%, Trevor. So again, I came back to Manitoba. This is where I grew up. And so I've been living in BC for about 15 years or so prior to just a couple years ago. And I came back for family. I've got family here and my parents and stuff like that. So I came back with my family, you know, and leaving Vancouver. Vancouver is an amazing city. You know, there's 3, I think, meetups in Vancouver of different caliber, like Bitcoin Dev meetup, where you're far down the rabbit hole with people like us, and then other Bitcoin and beers type meetups where people, you know, you can just go and, you know, have, you know, conversations with other Bitcoiners. And so I looked at that, and when I came here, you know, I started searching. I'm like, what do we got here? You know, who's in Bitcoin here? And I'm reaching out on Twitter, and I'm like, hello, you know, speaking out into the you know, into the open and seeing. And I found a couple of, you know, I found a handle on Twitter that was like Bitcoin Manitoba, that it hadn't been touched in 10 years. So I tried to message them, no response. I don't know who that was. And then there was like a Crypto Nuts community here, which was, you know, they were very Bitcoin, I think, in the early days, and they're very pro Bitcoin, but they're also like altcoins and Ethereum, and they talk about trading and DeFi and
so they're
staking.
shitcoiners.
Exactly, all that stuff. And so great, that's all good for them. And I was like, hey, you know, fill your boots, do what you want to do. And they talk about Bitcoin, but I was like, Bitcoin only. Like, who's the Bitcoin only people?
Yeah.
I need to draw the line in the sand, because again, we talk about convincing government, convincing people. It's like you really got to separate from crypto Bitcoin, because Bitcoin's not just number go up. So when I looked around, it took me a couple of weeks, looking at meetups, asking around, and just wasn't finding anything. And so to me, my what is it? I listened to I started listening to some other podcasts about people that started meetups, like how do you start a meetup and all that, kind of just like, maybe I could do this, right? And I can't remember who it was, but one of these meetings, I think it was a Nashville meetup. One of the guys in Nashville had said, if not me, then who? And I was like, wow, that's like a pretty powerful kind of like quote, right? And it can be said for so many things in life, you have a business idea and you're like, oh, well, should I do this? And it's like, well, if not you, like, who's going to do it? And that was my thinking with the meetup. If they haven't done it already, who's going to do it? I haven't found anybody, more into Bitcoin in Manitoba yet. So like, who's going to do this? And so that was it. I basically I got a Twitter handle, BTC Manitoba, and basically put it out there. I was like, hey, I'm looking, I'm trying to establish this meetup. I'm looking for, other Bitcoiners. And I had a decent following on Twitter or X, whatever you want to call it. And, I just started out there and basically started getting some traction. And then BTC Sessions kind of got a hold, found, kind of saw it, was like, oh yeah, this is good, and got behind it. So he was like retweeted, just started getting traction. Obviously you get support from, other Bitcoiners with good audiences. We just got traction. And then the other meetups started following us, started retweeting us, like our mission of like trying to get this thing going. And like, I don't know, it took off. And so I set up a meetup.com page. And basically I was like, I built a bit of a survey. Like I created a survey that I was going to bring with me. Like I printed it out. I set up the meetup thing, and then I just started marketing the hell out of it, right? And all the other meetups supported, right? They were like, this is our first meetup. And so retweets by like meetups across Canada, even some of the ones in the States, and we just gained traction. People started following, we started growing, and then the Manitoba Bitcoiners started kind of like coming out of the woodworks, and then the meetup, we just started growing. I was like, oh, there's 16 people that have joined our meetup.com.
That's
and then
good.
all of a sudden it was 22 people had joined the meetup. I'm like, awesome. So I'm like, okay, we're going to do our inaugural meetup. I found a local pub and just a place that had room for 20 people. I was like, I don't know, maybe 10 will come, maybe none will come, maybe 20. And I think we had 22 people show up. And
for the first meeting?
For the first meeting, man.
Dude, congrats.
It was incredible. I was like, what? Which was great. And so so we did our first meetup. I did a survey where I was kind of like, what do you want to get out of this? And I gave like multiple choice of like, do you want to learn about mining, self-custody? Do you want to learn about energy, liquid? Do you want to learn about lightning? Like all these different things. And so everybody filled out, what they'd like to learn about, and then what people could potentially also talk about. So trying to pull the Bitcoiners that know stuff and be like, hey, do you want to, do presentations, or, what could you talk about? So just gather data. Again, before I started, which was really cool as well, various companies also were like, hey, we'll send you stickers. And then Bull Bitcoin reached out and said, hey, we'll sponsor you with a bunch of swag and things to get going. And so just got amazing support, and then everybody, pumped it up. And so we had a good first session, just a meet and greet, right? Hey, who are you? How did you get into Bitcoin? And we had a few shitcoiners come as well, but they were just curious, right? And some newbies, like people that were like, I don't know nothing about this. I just wanted to come and learn. And one of those guys has now come to every meetup, and he's getting more and more into it. So it's like
no longer a new coiner.
Totally. And that was like super redeeming, for like that was the goal, right? Is bring people, teach them. And so since then, so I think that was April. Oh no, that was February. And so our second one, we did a halving party. And so April 18th or something, I can't remember, we had joined up with the Canadian Bitcoin Conference, and they were going to do a live stream across Canada with all the meetups. So every meetup, like 12 different meetups across the country, were all having halving parties. And we did this kind of like, they went to every meetup and did an interview like this. So I interview and I'd show everybody. Everyone's like, "Woo, we're all here!" Like it was a party, right? And so I got, even before that, we worked with Quick Bit Crypto out of Saskatchewan. Dale's awesome. He was organizing the cross Canada thing, and he found a whole bunch of sponsors from like Blockstream to Bitcoin panties to like the trading cards you've got. Like we got a ton of swag, books, and so for the halving party, we just had tons of stuff to give away, and we got again over 25 people came out to the halving party. And everybody just kind of hung out. And again, we watched the live stream and participated, and it was awesome. We gave away, some Blockstream Jades and stuff like that. So it was cool. And then I did, I think we skipped a month. And then the next month I did like an intro to Bitcoin session. And again, we had about 17 people come out, a lot of newbies. And I went through one of my, it's an hour and a half long Bitcoin kind of like, the origins of money to like where we are today, more geared at somebody new to the subject. So I did that. Again, it was great. And then we're just planning our next one. We're going to do something on self-custody next. And we're actually going to have Dale come in, who was out in Victoria just in September, I think, for one of the big conferences. He's going to come and talk about self-custody. We'll do a workshop and just teach that. So that's the next one we're going to be promoting and hopefully getting out new people. We lost our venue. They started to jack the prices. So we're looking for a new venue right now, which kind of slowed us down. But yeah, that's kind of the meetup right now. And again, I've met great people. And it's fun. It's again, my selfish reasons a lot were to meet more Bitcoiners, local people that I could have conversations like you and I are having, on more regular and more in not a podcast, but just, as
in person,
fellow Bitcoiners, kind of
real life. Yeah.
Ripping on Bitcoin,
Well, it's so refreshing. I mean, anybody who I haven't personally been to a meetup, but I've been to a lot of gatherings and events and stuff. So it's kind of similar. But I remember when I first got into Bitcoin, it was 2 years before I met another person who came to Bitcoin and was an actual Bitcoiner. It was a dark time for me, man. I remember every time I'd say the word Bitcoin, my wife would give me this look, people around me would look at me funny, and it was very lonely, and once you finally meet that other person who came to Bitcoin, not because you dragged them into it or anything like that, and you guys can have this conversation that's real, because at the end of the day, Bitcoiners, like we had talked about a little bit off air, is Bitcoiners are awake. We see things that other people aren't paying attention to.
Yep.
And so it's so refreshing to be able to have those conversations and not feel like an outcast or a weirdo or
100%.
Anything like that. So,
100%.
Congratulations on just the meetup in general. We're kind of getting to the end of this. I know that you've got a hard stop here pretty soon, but I want to just ask you a couple of questions about, general advice that you would give to the community, to people who are new to Bitcoin, new to mining. What are some things that you would tell them to keep them going, keep them strong? Because as someone who's been through this experience very recently, there were some times where I was like, am I doing the right thing here? Is this real, or am I just fucking crazy?
Yeah, I think it's going back to the fundamentals. From an advice perspective, again, we're conditioned to think in short-term cycles. And so we really got to think in longer-term cycles with this. This is not a get-rich-quick scheme, which so many people come to it thinking, I'm going to buy this and it's going to go to 1 million. That's their reasons for existing in this. And so people that have gotten past that, if they're thinking about mining, to me, they've already gotten to that point where they're thinking longer term, right? You're not going to go out and spend a couple $1,000s, to set this up if you don't believe in kind of the thesis of Bitcoin and where it's going. So I think all the times I would reach out to other Bitcoiners, get in the communities, right? You got to be around people, like I said, the meetups, people that get the fundamental thesis of Bitcoin and are not waved by money. They're not swayed, by an ICO token drop and all that crap, right? So it's a different kind of person. I don't tell people to buy Bitcoin. I tell people to study Bitcoin. So it's like, to me, I would be like, where are you having the problem? Like, where is the doubt coming from? Because then go down that rabbit hole, right? Because it's like, maybe they need to talk or they need to read a certain kind of material about, economics, or maybe they need to read a technical thing where they can, understand how something works a bit deeper, right? So, I think if you're getting down, you need to take a break, like in anything, right? If you're getting burnt out building a startup, take a break, and even me in Bitcoin, I've taken breaks, from being hardcore, memeing out there and trash talking people on, X and all that. Like, you got to take breaks sometimes and just kind of like refocus. So, I think it's just think the long term, why are you doing this? Again, what's the point, right? Why are you doing this? If its number go up, you're going to get more frustrated, right? Because you're chasing fiat gains, right? So to me, it's really think about the why. Why did you get into this? If it's just to tinker, then keep tinkering. Find a new thing to tinker. Find something, build something new. If you're that type of person. So those would be my kind of suggestions. It's the same for most
things in life.
Yeah, we can't go 100 miles an hour all the time. You can't just be doing one thing all the time. You need to take a step back sometimes. And again, Bitcoin is a vast thing, right? Like, you can play on the energy side, you can play on the charts and the number go up side, you can play on the meetups, you can circular economy, like there's layer 2 stuff, like there's just so much to look at. So I think, if you're burnt out, take a break. If you're bored, look at a different area of Bitcoin, go and, learn more, gain that knowledge, gain that mental asset that is also important.
It's great advice. Like I really appreciate your perspective on all of this because, I kind of dragged myself through it. I have the type of spirit where it's like I will just keep hammering and hammering, and whether it takes me a year or 5 days, like I will just keep going. But a lot of people don't have that, and it's easy to get discouraged when you're the only person like in your sphere that is talking about this or thinking about this or analyzing this. And I think like what you said about taking a step back and kind of asking yourself why you're doing what you're doing is super important because, I've asked myself that a million times. It's like, why am I here? Why am I doing a podcast? Why am I speaking with Bitcoiners every single week and trying to move this needle forward? It's like, well, I know my reasons why, and I'm secure in that. But if you don't know what your reasoning is, then like exactly why are you doing it? So find that out.
Yeah. Doing things for just money doesn't last.
No.
Once you get the money, then what keeps you going?
What's
right?
next?
Right. So it's money's important. And we're building it's this financial system and all that. But again, it comes back to that why. So it's
we're getting to the top of the hour here. So I've got a question for you. I ask everybody this question. This is like the end of the Bitcoin Build a Mind podcast question.
Cool.
What does Bitcoin mean to you, Craig?
Bitcoin is about financial inclusion to me. Like at the root of it, it's the peer-to-peer, decentralized. Bitcoin is for the people. It is the money system for the people, by the people, operated by the people. Like to me, that's what's important. Let's reduce consumption or reduce corruption, I should say. Let's stop funding wars. Let's, bank the unbanked. Let's create a savings vehicle that we haven't had. Like our current system just makes people spend their money rather than save it and feel secure. So to me, it's all about that. It's the financial inclusion and it's about the new system. It's the money protocol on top of the internet. And to me, that's what it means to me. That's what, motivates me. Again, I go back to seeing all these small miners like gridless, that to me is what Bitcoin is about. It's about how this small group of people could on their own bring electricity, bring a self-sustainable solution that actually generates revenue for them. Like that to me is what gets me excited about Bitcoin, and not having to have, the government take care of all of us everywhere in all parts of our lives. Like we need to take back some of our sovereignty in many areas, not just finance, but many areas. So
100%.
yeah, that's it for me, man.
Yeah, dude, it was a beautiful answer. I appreciate that. I do want to give you the opportunity to tell people where they can find you. Tell them about your newsletter. Tell them about BitHelm. Where can they find all of these things?
Yeah, definitely. So my main newsletter is on Bitcoin. If you search, you'll find it, but on bitcoin.io. I also have, so I'm on Twitter at Craig on Bitcoin, so you can always find me there. BitHelm.com is our company as well. And if you go onto X in my profile, you'll see a link to BTC Manitoba, which is our Manitoba meetup. We have a page there. And then we're also on Meetup, so you can get to links if you want to join the Meetup. Would love for that. If you're a business locally here in Manitoba or Canada that's looking to get into mining, happy to help you. Again, reach out, have any questions. We do consulting, help you procure gear, help you even set it up, get electrical, all that stuff. So reach out. You can reach me there. But yeah, thanks so much for having me. I really appreciate it. I love our conversation. It's a good time. So
yeah, well, I appreciate you coming on the show. Just so the audience knows, I will make sure all of those links are in the description of this video. So just go there, click on them, reach out to Craig. He is a wealth of information. He's a really super nice guy. Like, I've loved all of our conversations. I've got a couple of things I want to talk to you about off air. So just stick around for a couple of seconds. I won't take up too much of your time. But guys, awesome. I appreciate you being here, watching this episode. We're 36 episodes into this thing. It's rolling out. Like, this is a great thing that we're doing. I really appreciate everyone, coming back and watching this. If you like this, please like, comment, let me know your feedback, how I can do better, and what you liked about it. So with that, guys, this is the Build a Mind podcast, and we will see you.
Please note, the Build a Mind podcast provides information for general educational purposes only. This information should not be construed as legal, financial, or investment advice. We do not guarantee the accuracy or completeness of any information presented, and we encourage you to consult with a professional advisor, legal advisor, and/or financial advisor before making any financial decisions. The Build a Mind podcast and its affiliates are not responsible for any losses incurred as a result of using the information provided.